Not so long ago, boarding a train with a digital ID wasn't an option at every station. Now we access government services straight from our mobile banking apps. Technology is reshaping our lives at breakneck speed, and here in Kazakhstan's parliament, lawmakers are racing to keep up, drafting new regulations on artificial intelligence with a full-fledged digital code just around the corner. Today we're at the Mazhilis to sit down with the MP Yekaterina Smyshlyayeva, arguably the face of these digital reforms. It's going to be a fascinating conversation about striking the right balance, fostering innovation while ensuring technology remains safe and under control. I am Uliana Ashimova, and this is The Profiles, a Silkway TV project about the world we live in and the people shaping its future. Coming up in today's program, I often get asked, do you use AI to draft laws? My answer is, right now it's absolutely useless for that. How should artificial intelligence be regulated? Let's be clear, banning things in the digital world doesn't really work. The law's strictness is offset by a lax enforcement. That's how it is now. How can personal data be effectively protected? Are we getting big fines? Our fines are still low, for now. We'll also discuss the everyday realities of MPs. Standing firm in your position and finding middle ground are two very different approaches. A great example is e-scooter laws, my nightmare. I realized there's no time to waste. Yekaterina Smyshlyayeva, member of the Mazhilis and secretary of the Committee on Economic Reform and Regional Development. Hello, Yekaterina Vasilyevna. Hello. My first question is about digital legislation. Right now, Parliament is working actively on what many describe as very interesting but completely unclear. Do we have any clear examples, or is the whole world still feeling its way through this, trying to figure out the right legal approach? Honestly, when it comes to digital law, we're all writing history as we go. There are no tried and true models to follow, no gold standard that has already proven its effectiveness. Even in countries where laws have been put in place, it's too soon to say whether they're actually working, because the digital world moves at lightning speed. What's been put in place today might not even be the right approach, and no one can say for sure. Every country is on a different page when it comes to digital development. The level of integration, the scope and quality of technologies being adopted, it all varies. That's why there's no size-fits-all solution. For us, the priority is clear. We focus on our national interests, our legal framework, and where we stand in terms of digital progress. Most of our legislation is tailored specifically for Kazakhstan. That said, we do keep a close eye on international practices. What are the risks in all of this? There's always a risk of getting it wrong. Sometimes even the core concept of a technology isn't fully understood yet, let alone how it will integrate into society and what kind of impact it will have. We can try to predict potential risks, but honestly, a lot of those forecasts end up being more like science fiction than reality. The biggest challenge is that by the time a law makes it through the legislative pipeline, the technology it was meant to regulate has often evolved so much that the original rules don't even apply anymore. Let's talk about how to draft laws for an industry that evolves at lightning speed while the legislative process itself, writing, debating and passing laws, takes much longer. Absolutely. The Ministry of Digital Development just announced a law on artificial intelligence. But let's be real, not everyone even fully understands what AI is yet. For most people, it's still this abstract concept, right? Maybe they've heard of ChatGPT and that's about it. And now there's going to be an actual law. So first of all, why do we need one? And second, how do you even regulate AI? Well, after a lot of discussions, the consensus was that yes, we do need a law. Why? First, regulation provides security. But there's another side to this. Without clear rules, investors won't come. When investors look at a market, one of the first things they check is the regulatory landscape. If there are no laws in place today, nothing protects them from new ones tomorrow. Exactly. Imagine launching some project in a legal gray area only to be told later, sorry, but we've just introduced new regulations and you're not in compliance. Investors need stability. If the rules are clear from the beginning, they can assess the risks which directly affect how much they're willing to invest. That makes sense. These days, every country is racing to keep up with rapid technological change. But it's important to understand that not all countries play the same role. Some countries are users, while others are the ones actually developing the technology. And when we're talking about cutting-edge generative AI models, only a handful of countries are really in the game. For us, the goal is to integrate AI smoothly into our legal system, so we're not left playing catch-up when it inevitably becomes a key player in the global economy and society. And how is that already becoming evident?
In
the past, when we talked about automation, we were mostly referring to machines taking over physical labor. But now AI is replacing intellectual tasks, which is a completely different level. We're talking about processing massive amounts of data, AI-powered assistants, and eliminating routine work across industries, including journalism, by the way. I've been asked more than once about the ethical implications of using AI in media. The impact on the economy is going to be massive. AI can analyze and structure enormous data sets in record time. What once took us decades can now be done in 10 to 15 minutes, or sometimes even in just 10 seconds. People are already seeing this in action. Search engines now have built-in AI that doesn't just show results but actually summarizes information for you, pulling from multiple sources. I was talking to some colleagues recently and we joked that you can already recognize GPT-flavored text. It has a certain style that gives it away. Let me tell you something. Some scientific journals and editorial boards are now asking authors to include their GPT queries and responses alongside their articles. The idea is to treat them as primary sources and get a sense of how much AI contributed to the final work. That's one side of it. Then there's the AI we all interact with in daily life. But let's be real, for now it's just a beginning. Another issue is related to AI-powered systems that are already built into decision-making processes. We're talking about advanced scoring models and predictive algorithms used for assessments, forecasting, and even government administration. Is it already in use? Absolutely. AI is already running complex systems. Look at ride-hailing apps, for example. AI automatically adjusts prices based on demand, optimizes routes and balances supply and demand in real time. Then there's AI-powered surveillance, facial recognition, and other security applications. And in healthcare, AI is being tested for analyzing vast amounts of patient data to improve diagnostics. But for now, these are still pilot projects. Until we have clear regulations, the healthcare sector is unlikely to fully embrace AI-driven solutions. That's exactly why legislation is needed. And one fundamental principle remains. No matter how advanced AI becomes, the final decision should always rest with a human. Responsibility for AI-driven actions has to stay in human hands. So this all comes down to security, right? It's all about security, right, but also accountability. AI isn't a legal entity, at least not yet. Not yet. Well, for our lifetime, I think not yet will be enough. But who knows, our kids might live in a world where AI has legal status, depending on how far things go. But how do you even regulate something like this? I mean, either you ban everything or you allow everything. How do you strike the right balance? Well, let's be clear. Banning things in the digital world doesn't really work. You can't enforce it. The way things are structured now, it's like an upside-down pyramid, balancing on a single point. Picture that. Yeah, that's unstable. At the top you have laws, rules that ban, restrict and punish. At the bottom, you've got the system trying to enforce them. But it's tiny compared to the scale of the digital world. You see the problem? This isn't like pushing paperwork from one office to another. Information spreads instantly, reaching millions in a fraction of a second. Delete the information from the internet, they say. Sure, that's why digital regulation has to be based on principles and ethics rather than outright bans. Some restrictions make sense from a technical standpoint, but overall prohibitions aren't an effective tool. Let's be real, we can't stop kids from using social media or ChatGPT. Yekaterina Vasilyevna, here's the thing. It is somewhat clear how to write a law about housing and utilities. That's pretty straightforward. But when it comes to regulating artificial intelligence, that's where things get murky. Where do we stand right now? Is AI development ahead of legislation, or is the law keeping pace? Did we start regulating too early, or are we already behind and scrambling to catch up? When it comes to the digital world, the law is always playing catch up. And AI is no exception. It's already everywhere in our daily lives, and regulation is still finding its footing. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's given us time to observe, assess risks and learn from global practices. That's why now we can confidently introduce some ground rules. Take AI-generated content, for example. Labeling it is a perfectly reasonable requirement. If AI was involved in creating something, people have a right to know. Now, in some industries, things are trickier, like healthcare. If AI plays a role in medical decisions, that information has to be disclosed. Why is that so important? Because it's about consumer rights. People should always have the option to refuse AI-driven decisions. Here's a real-world example. Many government procurement processes are now automated, with AI making decisions based on specific criteria. And under current law, those automated decisions can't be appealed. If a human committee makes the decision, you can challenge it. But if AI does, case closed, since it is an automated decision. That's actually a serious constitutional issue. People should always have the right to request a human review of decisions that affect them. If we start allowing AI to operate unchecked without human oversight, we're heading straight into a dystopian sci-fi scenario. So labeling AI-generated content is just step one. Will enforcement be perfect? Of course not. Some will comply, others won't. But we need to start shaping a culture of responsible AI use. The classification of AI systems and the question of responsibility, whether it falls on the developer, the user, or someone else, are key issues we need to address. There are various processes and systems at play, and we need a clear understanding of them all. The real question is, which AI systems should the government regulate and which should be left alone? That's something we need to define. When AI directly impacts human life and health, regulation is non-negotiable. The same goes for systems used in government decision-making. They must be properly monitored and controlled. I often get asked, do you use AI to draft laws? My answer is, right now it's absolutely useless for that. But that's beside the point. When it comes to AI making government-level decisions, we need full transparency, clear oversight, knowledge of what data it's trained on, and a deep understanding of how it operates. As for everyday AI, things like smart assistants or entertainment tools, that's a different conversation. Those don't necessarily need heavy regulation, at least not yet. It's a complex challenge, no doubt. But with the expertise of our community, I'm confident we can put together a regulatory framework that not only fosters technological growth, but also safeguards our people. Yekaterina Vasilyevna, thanks to you, we've just gotten a glimpse of what an MP's daily work actually looks like. Not just the plenary sessions that are widely broadcast, but everything that goes on behind the scenes. So what happens in this office? What does a typical day for an MP look like?
считается традиционным.
Well, in theory, we have a standard work schedule, but in reality, the workload is so heavy that I've never once measured my job in hours or shifts.
Жизни своей в часах там и в нормах не считается.
How do you measure it?
В выполненном объеме.
By what gets done. I care about results. If something needs our attention, we'll work as long as it takes, even if that means pulling all-nighters. Can you give an example? Maybe something recent? I'm sure you have plenty, but what's something recent?
Знаете, когда выпускается закон?
Well, you know, when a bill is about to be passed, that's an incredibly intense time. This place fills up with people, like representatives. Right here.
У наших консультантов и у наших юристов, то есть когда...
Here in the offices of our legal consultants, our advisors, anywhere the final details are being worked out.
Нюансов, которые идут...
When we're putting the finishing touches on a bill before it goes to a plenary session, or preparing for the first reading, where we have to make a strong case for it, the discussions can be exhausting. Sometimes we practically live here, working until 2, 3 in the morning or even later. Those are our crunch times, so to speak. And sometimes when we need to reach a compromise between different regulatory bodies, we'll sit down and debate for hours, however long it takes, to find common ground. That's just how it works. Speaking of compromise, how do you develop that skill? You're already in your second term as an MP, and before that, you spent years working in public service. But standing firm in your position and finding middle ground are two very different approaches. Which one do you lean towards more often?
Вот вы какой придерживаетесь чаще?
Я вам хочу сказать, что большая политика это, наверное, в большей части не лобовые удары.
You know, high-level politics isn't about charging full speed ahead.
Подразумевает глубокий.
It's more about strategy, carefully analyzing every regulation, weighing different options, staying flexible.
Лобильность какую-то, потому что...
Because honestly, there are very few absolute truth in the world.
Абсолютных вещей, их очень мало в мире.
Or maybe none.
Либо нет, потому что когда ты...
Exactly. When I was just starting out, I used to walk into discussions thinking, well, things are obvious. But then the debate would start and my colleagues would raise concerns.
Я начинаю прямо во время группы.
And I'd realize in real time that what seemed obvious to me wasn't necessarily obvious to others.
Моего опыта, который я имею, да?
My perspective was shaped by my experience, my background, my values, but society is made up of countless different viewpoints. Take businesses, for example, they're highly organized.
Всегда бизнес или...
They have associations, lobbying groups, professional representatives. It's a well-oiled machine. A great example is the e-scooter law, my personal nightmare. But let's not go there. At first it seemed like a straightforward issue. We were addressing a real safety concern, and the number of public complaints about reckless scooter use was through the roof. But once the public debate started, something we do regularly in Parliament, it turned out the loudest voices in the conversation were coming from the scooter-sharing companies. Meanwhile, the other side, the pedestrians, the everyday people actually affected by the issue, weren't organized in the same way. They might have voiced their concerns individually, but they didn't have a structured, coordinated response. You represent them. In a sense, yes. But as I've mentioned before, when well-organized groups make their voices heard, it can be difficult to pick up on what the real recipients of these services, those who aren't part of any structured group, actually need. Ordinary people usually don't have that kind of collective representation, and in reality it's up to legislators to listen to them. That's our role, and it's something we must do. The most important principle is ensuring that every voice is heard. Why a nightmare though? Because it was a real battle. The debates were intense, so much so that people were even suggesting holding dedicated forums just to discuss it. But let's not dwell on that. It was tough. Let's put it that way. I'm not asking for specific examples. I'm more interested in how you handle situations like that. Because on one hand, you know you're doing the right thing, but on the other, you start questioning, do I even need all this?
Надо вообще.
Надо, потому что я же...
You do, because at the end of the day, I understand that big corporations and business groups have serious money behind them. But on our side, we have real people who need laws that actually work for them. I remember back then I was doing 4 or 5 interviews a day. My colleagues and I, especially those who co-authored the bill, coordinated everything. My mindset was simple. We couldn't let there be a single platform where the other side wasn't heard. Sometimes the resistance is out in the open, sometimes it happens behind closed doors. But either way, if you know your stuff, if you have strong expertise, if you're confident in your position, then you keep pushing forward.
Если есть погруженность в тему, то нужно идти уже как бы...
Вы довольны?
Are you happy with how the e-scooter law turned out in the end?
Ну, мы вот сейчас второй этап запустили.
Well, we're already working on the next stage. It's been sent for government review. The law itself is solid in terms of rules, but the real issue is enforcement.
Действительно, есть сложности.
One of the biggest challenges is regulating speed.
Понимаем. Мы сейчас можем.
Right now we can measure it, but there's no way to track violators.
То есть, если...
With cars you have license plates, but scooters don't have any form of identification.
Мы сейчас продумали...
So we've come up with a system in partnership with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Scooters will be registered through insurance companies, and each one will get an insurance number that cameras can track. That way we'll finally have a way to enforce speed limits, just like we promised. During the discussion, we talked about the importance of building a culture of responsible riding, ensuring people are aware of speed limits, making scooter signs more noticeable, and so on. Now we're just refining this aspect as originally planned. When it comes to data protection laws, we actually have one of the most well-developed regulatory models out there. Even international experts recognize that. But the weak spot is enforcement. Regulators simply don't have the capacity to monitor compliance at every level. The law's strictness is offset by lax enforcement. That's how it is now. But is this just a phase, or will we get past it? It's not just growing pains, it's a systemic problem. We're talking about millions of people whose personal data is being collected and millions of companies handling that data. The amount of information being gathered is insane. Half the time it's not even necessary. Right now we're in the early stages of shaping a digital culture that will bring more order to the process. Are we moving more towards ethical guidelines rather than legal regulations? Well, the legal framework is already in place, but the problem is that data collection is growing exponentially while regulatory bodies aren't. So part of the solution is simply teaching companies not to collect unnecessary data in the first place. For example, we recently banned businesses from making paper copies of ID documents. Of course, change doesn't happen overnight. The law came into effect in February, but some places were still asking for copies in March. Now though, if you check into certain hotels, they just note down your details instead of photocopying your ID. That's progress. Before you'd find piles of discarded ID copies behind buildings, just blowing around in the wind. That was the norm. But over time, things will change. People will start demanding better protection of their own data. Take those messages you get. Your personal data has been leaked. That's now a legal requirement. If a regulator finds out that the data has been compromised, or if a company experiences a leak, they're legally required to notify you. So now you'll get a message saying, "Beware, your data has been exposed." What do you mean by being aware? What should we do? In situations like this, it's important to understand what to expect. If your bank card details were exposed, the first step is to replace them. It's quick and easy. Unlike biometric data, you can change them without any trouble. If no card information was leaked, but, say, your phone number was, be prepared, you'll probably get a call soon from someone claiming to be with your bank's security service. They might try to convince you to move your money to a so-called safe account. That's a classic scam, so don't fall for it. Another key step is filing a complaint and pushing for an investigation. There's already a system in place for handling these cases, and it's becoming more effective over time. That's why we've increased fines for data breaches. In some neighboring countries, Europe for instance, companies face much harsher penalties. Their fines are turnover-based, meaning a data leak can cost them 10 times more than what it would take to invest in proper security measures up front. Are we getting big fines? Right now the fines are minimal. For the time being at least. You once asked about resistance. Well, this is a perfect example. There's significant pushback from the market because naturally businesses don't want to take risks when they're gathering so much data. And as AI continues to evolve, the value of personal data is only going up. These datasets power scoring systems, predictive models, and countless other applications. Demand is rising, which means stronger protections are more crucial than ever. When you stepped into this larger role and found yourself with a whole team of assistants after working in Kostanai's Mazhilis, which is a regional parliament, how did that feel? It was definitely a change. For one thing, the staff there is much smaller. But I have to say the teams at the Mazhilis are incredibly hard-working, like little worker bees. Right. There's a huge amount of responsibility on them, no question about it. But the biggest difference isn't just the workload, it's the level of authority. I spent 9 years as a member of the regional Mazhilis, leading a permanent commission and the Amanat faction. And during that time, I came to a realization there are so many issues you just can't solve at the regional level. People would come to me with problems and I'd understand exactly what needed to be done, but without a decision at the national level, my hands were tied. So when I finally got to the Mazhilis and saw the kind of impact a Mazhilis member can have here, I knew I couldn't waste a second. So many of the issues I'd heard about for years can be addressed, especially through legislation. And one thing I've noticed, both regionally and nationally, is that we have an incredibly strong, dedicated expert community. I might have been just lucky, but the people I work with in digital legislation are just phenomenal. And it's not just in this area. Whether it's scientists, industry veterans, or policy experts, there are so many professionals who willingly dedicate their time to these discussions and bring in valuable ideas. You have said you might have been just lucky. But what do your colleagues think? How did they see this kind of civic involvement, people from all sorts of professions voluntarily taking part in the legislative process? Yeah, voluntarily. Is that something you see often? More and more. From what I've observed, civic engagement is growing every day. You can even see the shift in public consultations. In the past, people would mostly come in to talk about personal problems, but now more and more of them show up saying, I know what needs to change in the law, and that's why I am here.